Good afternoon. I want to call this subcommittee on the Housing, Transportation, and Community Development Subcommittee to order. Thank you so much to our witnesses for participating today, and thank you also to Senator Lummis and all of your team for working with us on this bipartisan hearing. When Senator Lummis and I first met to discuss our goals for this subcommittee, Native housing emerged as a top priority for both of us. And we both understand that finding affordable housing is a challenge for every community right now, but in Native and tribal communities, barriers to housing and home ownership are particularly challenging. And as we know, if you don't have a safe, decent place to call home, nothing else in your life works. Not your education, not your job, not your family, not your health, not anything. Native people experience this reality in very tangible and specific ways, as tribal leaders in Minnesota and around the country tell me all the time. Minnesota is home to 11 sovereign tribal nations and large indigenous communities in the Twin Cities and Duluth and Bemidji. And housing challenges in Native communities in Minnesota and around the country stretch across the entire housing continuum, from the lack of emergency shelter to a shortage of home ownership opportunities on tribal lands. People struggle to get mortgages and appraisals and title insurance. If you own a home, keeping it in good repair can be difficult because of a shortage of contractors and skilled tradespeople. Tribal communities are often rural and remote, which adds to the cost of infrastructure like water and sewer. Now, these issues are common in rural communities, but they are exacerbated on tribal land. Leased land and trust land each come with their own challenges. Mortgage lending on trust land can mean months or sometimes even years of administrative delays working through the BIA. And many lenders just won't do business at all on trust lands. Mortgages on leased lands can also face lengthy administrative delays. Senator Rounds and I partnered on a bill to take the first step on fixing these problems 3 years ago. And earlier this year, Senator Rounds and Senator Thune and Senator Tester and I introduced a bill to take the next step in addressing these delays. In addition, much of the housing stock on tribal land is substandard and needs significant repair. Homes lack full plumbing, complete kitchens, and sufficient heating. According to a HUD study, housing in tribal lands is about 6 times more likely to have heating or plumbing deficiencies in comparison to the rest of the country. And repairs and maintenance are expensive, and so many tribes end up spending scarce federal housing dollars maintaining existing housing rather than building the additional units that are needed to meet demand. The result is unsafe homes that can sit vacant and boarded up, even as the demand for housing is increasing. So even with recent increases, inflation-adjusted funding for the Indian Housing Block Grant is well below where it was 25 years ago, and well below what I believe is needed to meet the trust and treaty obligations of the federal government for housing in Native communities. Housing shortages and homelessness are experienced on tribal land when families crowd into homes not nearly big enough for all the people living there. This is sometimes called doubling up, which could suggest a relative sleeping on a couch or sharing a bedroom, but in practice, overcrowding can be much more intense, with reports of 15 or even 20 people sharing a 2-bedroom home. Native communities have strong cultural traditions of not letting relatives go without a place to stay when you have a house to share. And I can tell you, in cold climates like Minnesota and Wyoming, sleeping outside can be deadly. In May of 2021, in my first hearing as chair of this subcommittee, we held a hearing on Native housing issues, and we heard about the need for more supportive housing that combines shelter with culturally specific programming to support Native people experiencing homelessness. In my home state of Minnesota, Native Americans account for 13% of people experiencing homelessness, despite being only about 1% of the state's overall population. Without culturally specific programming and trauma-informed systems, Native people living with homelessness struggle to get access to the services and the stable housing that they need. We've also heard about the importance of reauthorizing the Native American Housing Assistance and Determination Act, or NAHASDA. This was last updated in 2014, and it's far past time that important bipartisan legislation that will cut red tape for housing development in Native communities, better uphold our promises to Native veterans, and put a stop to drug use and violent crime. I'm very grateful to Senator Schatz and Senator Murkowski for leading this effort in the last Congress, and I look forward to working with them to finally get this done. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about what we are doing that is working, what is not working, what needs reform, and what needs more support. These are issues of bipartisan interest and places where we've demonstrated the capacity to work together. So I look forward to building on that shared sense of purpose and progress so that we can make progress on issues for Native communities. So thank you very much, and I now turn to Senator Lummis for her opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you all witnesses for joining us today. I especially want to thank Mr. Patrick Goggles for being here today. Mr. Goggles brings a vast knowledge and experience working on tribal housing. His resume is very impressive, currently serving as the Executive Director of the Northern Arapaho Tribal Housing Authority. Mr. Goggles formerly served in the Wyoming State Legislature and on the Northern Arapaho Business Council. Thanks so much, Patrick, for being here. And I want to thank the rest of our witnesses as well. The expertise on this panel is exceptional. In my state of Wyoming, we have two federally recognized tribes, the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone. Both tribes share the Wind River Reservation. The Wind River Reservation is the 7th largest American Indian reservation in size and 5th largest in population. Lack of safe, affordable, and available housing impacts communities across Wyoming, but especially on the Wind River Reservation. The housing gap is widened as the demand for housing is outpacing new construction. In many cases, as the chairwoman mentioned, multi-generational families are overcrowded in homes. These homes often have serious plumbing and electrical problems and are in dire need of repair. Congress has provided funding for Native American housing programs for several decades. Tribes and tribally designated housing entities use the funding for a range of affordable housing activities to benefit low-income tribal households. This includes developing new housing for rental or home ownership, maintaining and operating existing housing units, building infrastructure, and offering housing-related services. So I look forward to your advice and counsel on all of these issues. Additionally, I want to talk a little bit about the uniquenesses of working with Indian trust lands. On trust lands, the Bureau of Indian Affairs must process and certify mortgages issued by federal agencies and lenders. In some cases, the BIA has taken months to process mortgages. It creates particular problems in areas that have tribal trust lands available but don't have fee ownership land available. And that's why I've co-sponsored the Tribal Trust Land Home Ownership Act with Chairwoman Smith to create deadlines that BIA must meet for processing title documents. If you have other issues you want to raise about how that legislation could improve the delivery of services in this area, please let us know. I, along with several members of this subcommittee, are members of the Senate Community Development Financial Caucus. The caucus is a platform to address the needs of CDFIs so they have the resources to serve their communities. I believe CDFIs are a wise investment to multiply our federal dollars for maximum impact. So in closing, our witnesses today provide unique perspectives on the state of Native American housing, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. I thank you again for being here, and I am looking forward to learning ways to ensure tribal housing needs are met. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you so much. I will now introduce our witnesses. Thank you, Senator Lummis, for introducing Mr. Goggles. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Goggles. In addition, I'd like to introduce Chelsea Fish, who is Executive Director of the National American Indian Housing Council. Ms. Fish is a citizen of the Seminole Nation, of Oklahoma. For over 15 years, she has worked at the national level to address socioeconomic concerns on behalf of tribal communities on issues ranging from tribal gaming and Native small business to health and food sovereignty. Ms. Fish earned her Bachelor of Science in Health Education with an emphasis on public health from the University of the District of Columbia. She's originally from Tishomingo, Oklahoma. I said that correct, I hope, and currently lives with her family in Washington, D.C. Welcome. Pete Upton is the CEO of the Native CDFI Network and Executive Director of the Native 360 Loan Fund. Mr. Upton is a member of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. He serves as CEO, as I said, of the Native CDFI Network, which represents Native CDFIs around the country. In addition, Mr. Upton is the Executive Director of the Native 360 Loan Fund, a certified Native CDFI supporting Native American business owners in Nebraska, Iowa, and South Dakota. And joining us virtually is Tammy Moreland, who is chair of the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative to Prevent and End Homelessness. Ms. Moreland is a member of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. She currently serves as the chair of the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative, which was formed by Minnesota tribal nations in 2014 to understand, prevent, and end homelessness of Native peoples in Minnesota. In addition to her role with the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative, Ms. Moreland is a longtime employee of Tribal Family Services and Public Health Departments. We will begin with our in-person witnesses, and then turn to Ms. Moreland. And for witnesses, you each have 5 minutes for your opening statements. Each of you, I think, have a clock in front of you to help you stay oriented to that, and your full written statement will be made part of the record. Ms. Fish, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Maro. Inche istongo jok hayedegan. Chelsea Tlatlo, jihi jokro. Hi. My name is Chelsea Fish. Did you make it through the night okay? I hope you did. I'm the executive director of the National American Indian Housing Council. As Senator Smith mentioned, I'm a member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma and originally from a very small town called Tishomingo in southeastern Oklahoma in one of the poorest counties of the state, Johnston County. We grew up living in a very overcrowded home in my family. We lived just off of a dirt road, and there were about 20 of us at any given time nestled into my grandmother's home on our original trust land that was heated by wood stove. The National American Indian Housing Council was created by tribal housing programs back in 1974, and for over 5 decades, we've provided invaluable training and technical assistance to all tribes, tribal housing entities, and to Congress. We represent 293 members, all of which are federally recognized, and represent 493 tribal housing organizations, all of whom are constituents of this Congress. Ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate the opportunity to deliver this message on behalf of tribal communities this afternoon. It really is an outstanding opportunity for me, coming from the background that I do. Just a small little country girl from the middle of nowhere, or so I thought. Thank you for allowing this opportunity. I stand before you to shed light on a very pressing issue, and that issue is housing in Native American communities and here in the United States. It is uncanny how unaware that people are of the housing conditions in tribal territories and reservations. Every day I talk to people who are completely oblivious to some of the amounts of poverty and the impoverished situations and really the downtrodden situations that we find on Indian reservations. It's like nowhere else. Despite the progress made in recent decades, many tribal communities continue to face the significant challenges of poverty, including substandard housing, overcrowding, and homelessness. The median income of a Native American household is 30% less than the national average. Native American communities also experience higher rates of substandard housing with a significant number of homes lacking complete plumbing, kitchen, and sufficient heating. I'll say that again, significant amount of homes we're looking at 15.9% of homes being overcrowded compared to only 2.2 nationally. The lack of adequate housing in Indian country is a direct result of insufficient funding and resources. The Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act was enacted in 1996, and it was a step in the right direction, but Congress has failed to fulfill its trust obligation and really has been neglectful of the tribal community by keeping funding stagnant for more than 20 years. The purchasing power of these funds allocated for what we know as the Indian Housing Block Grant, which is the mechanism for getting money out to the tribes for developing housing, has diminished significantly due to inflation, leading to a rapid decline in new housing construction. Since 1998, tribal housing programs have lost $3.4 billion in funding by not keeping up with inflation compared to our sister program, the National Public Housing Program. To address the housing crisis in Indian country, we need Congress to increase funding, and we plead with Congress to increase this funding in Nahasda. The current funding levels are inadequate. Many tribes receiving less than $500,000 to operate their housing programs. Tribes simply cannot build more homes with such limited funding. Our geographical challenges alone, including isolation, the lack of developed housing, inaccessible lending markets, only exacerbate this problem. Reauthorizing Nahasda is crucial. We need an increased amount of resources and programmatic changes that streamline our housing programs. This reauthorization bill contains provisions that can enhance tribal access to funding, simplify various aspects of HUD and the Indian Housing Block Grant Program. Tribes need the flexibility to tailor their housing plans to their specific needs and priorities. An example of this flexibility is the prioritization of funds. As Senator Smith mentioned, Indians and Native Americans will not allow our elders and our needy and our vulnerable persons to go without. They will be prioritized. So a lot of our funds go to the prioritization of housing for elderly, and that leaves mothers of children, single mothers of children, parents who are whose children are going into the homes of family members, so on and so forth, without. I'd like to highlight a couple of examples to illustrate the current housing situation in Native American communities. In Nulato, Alaska, which is a remote village with no roads leading in or out, there's a need for nearly 20 homes. The population in Nulato is just over 200. But the estimated cost of construction of a single-family home is over $670,000. The current income level at the Nahasda rate in Nulato only allows for 29% of a home to be built in one single year. Similarly, the Comanche Nation Housing Authority in Oklahoma focuses on rehabilitating existing homes due to limited funding. There are resources available from various funding federal agencies, including HUD, U.S. Treasury, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Veterans Administration. However, tribes often face enormous barriers in accessing these resources. Some of these programs have requirements in them that do not honor and respect tribal sovereignty and self-determination by forcing them to collaborate with other community-based organizations to have pass-through access to the resources. But moreover, home ownership remains a significant challenge in Indian country. As we all just discussed in our opening, federal trust land cannot be used to secure a home loan, and lenders see doing business with tribes a risk. There is no incentive for lenders to do business with tribal nations or tribal citizens. There are no penalties from doing so either. Native borrowers.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Fish. You're about 2 minutes over. So if you could wrap up, we'd be very happy to, we'll be able to get at the rest of your comments and our questions as well.
It says I have 2 minutes, 30 seconds remaining.
No, that's how much you're over.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I apologize.
No worries, no worries.
It's the responsibility of this committee and Congress to fulfill its treaty obligations to tribal nations and restore Nahasda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mr. Goggles.
Good afternoon, Senator Chairman Smith and Vice Chair Lummis, For the record, my name is W. Patrick Goggles. I am the Executive Director of Northern Arapaho Tribal Housing, and we are located on the Wind River Indian Reservation in Wyoming. So I want to get right started with the things that we came here to talk about, and that, and first and foremost in mind, is the reauthorization of the Native American Housing and Self-Determination Act of 1992. And the reason that it concerns me is, like any other community in Wyoming or in Minnesota, the flow of funds into your community help you plan, develop, and implement those types of, in my case, housing projects. I have one current project that I've been working on for 6 years. It's about $9.1 million. And I'll be completing that project in September of 2023. But it's taken me 6 years to do that. And so it's important to reauthorize the funding streams that we receive through NAHASDA to allow us to do those strategic types of planning that help us plan the types of housing, affordable housing that we're going to construct. Not only that, but look forward to homeownership for many tribal members. Just real quickly, I manage 234 houses. Some of my houses are overcrowded, acute overcrowding. I have one 5-bedroom house that has 27 people in it. And I have another 3-bedroom house that has 15 people in it. The overcrowding is acute. The shortage of housing on our reservation is very acute. There are no private ownerships of individual family homes on the Wind River Indian Reservation currently. And that's my take on the HOSDA, because it'll help provide us with an annual allocation that we can plan with. So just so you understand what my executive director said, the unemployment rate on my reservation is 35%. And getting the kind of incomes to afford to make a house payment is very difficult to do that. 3 years ago, Congress first funded the Competitive Indian Housing Block Grant to allow tribes and their housing entities to apply for development funds. And they're not included in the regular IHBG, Indian Housing Block Grant. Okay, these are competitive funds that we apply for. And the experience has been the larger tribes and the smaller and medium tribes and the smaller tribes is not a level playing field. Okay, I can't afford to have an engineer on my staff. An engineer is worth their weight in gold in helping you determine how you're going to build on your tribal lands. So we have gaming revenue on our reservation, but that goes for the other needs that our tribe has, such as social services, for the human services, such as dealing with the addictions of meth and fentanyl on our reservation. So those are real life kinds of things that we deal with because we're in a rurally isolated community. My other folks that I represent, because I'm a Region 5 representative for Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah, and the other Region 3, North, South Dakota, and Nebraska, are rurally isolated. We're treaty-based land tribes. So many of our reservations experience the lack of essential service, such as fire prevention, such as EMT service. In our neck of the woods, the Law and Order Bureau, it's the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and you can have response times up to 30 minutes to 2 hours waiting for an EMT or a police officer to arrive on the scene. By the time they show up, other incidents have occurred. So I want to say that much. I know my 5 minutes went pretty fast, but I want to answer some of your questions with some more additional information for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Goggles. Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Chair Smith and Ranking Member Lummis and the subcommittee for this opportunity to present today. My name is Pete Upton, and I'm an enrolled citizen of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. And I am the CEO of the Native CDFI Network, and I keep my feet grounded in the work that I do. I am the Executive Director of Native 360 Loan Fund, and we serve Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, and Kansas. On behalf of the Native CDFI Network and the 90 certified and emerging Native CDFIs we serve, I welcome the opportunity to present about the capital access challenges facing Native home ownership and the pivotal role that Native CDFIs play in addressing those challenges, and what Congress can do to enhance the Native CDFIs' ability to grow home ownership. Despite recent progress by Native CDFIs, the challenges facing Native home ownership remain severe. Native communities and Native CDFIs face numerous challenges in providing home loans to Native communities. The challenges include access to low-interest long-term funding for Native CDFIs, the scarcity of availability of housing stock, the lack of infrastructure and skilled workers that further hampers the construction and renovation of homes, land issues, including limited availability, complex structures, also pose hurdles for expanding housing opportunities for the Native populations. These multifaceted challenges are highlighted, and they highlight the need for targeted support and innovative solutions addressing the housing needs in Indian country. And I want to stress innovative solutions in targeted support, and I'll get to that when we get into the questions. The state of affairs is challenging, but there is an effective solution, and that is Native CDFIs when it comes to Native home ownership. Native CDFIs are proven, irreplaceable engines for growing vibrant Native economies. According to the Treasury, for every dollar invested in CDFIs, they create $8 in private sector investments. Our impact is particularly significant in the area of Native home ownership, where Native CDFIs are playing a crucial role. Native CDFIs provide affordable home loans, assistance with down payments, homebuyer education, Native communities who have been overlooked by the traditional lenders. Native CDFIs are there to provide the support. By offering specialized financial products, comprehensive technical support, and extensive community engagement, we are expanding access to affordable home ownership opportunities within Native communities. Simply put, Native CDFIs need the support from Congress to grow its capacity to meet the moment. We have identified 6 key ways Congress can strengthen Native home ownership and the vital role Native CDFIs play in the endeavor. First, support us in ensuring the proposed CDFI certifications reforms do not harm Native CDFIs. The ongoing reform process of CDFI certification application and regulations by the CDFI Fund pose challenges for Native CDFIs. The proposed changes could hinder their ability to promote home ownership and economic progress in Indian country. Native CDFIs would either need to make drastic operational changes or alter their programs and products, or forego certification, resulting in reduced access to vital capital for serving their Native community. We urge Congress to address our concerns by advocating for a formal listening session with the CDFI Fund and the Native CDFI leaders, executive directors, to discuss and address the potential impacts of these reforms. Second, establish a Native Advisory Committee within Treasury and the CDFI Fund. This committee should be made up of Native CDFI executive leaders that would engage directly with Treasury and the CDFI Fund and provide valuable input on how policy and programs impact the flow of capital to communities, and listen to the Native CDFIs who are the boots on the ground in the community doing the work. Congress should mandate that Treasury establish a Native Advisory Committee made up of CDFI executive directors, and that committee would meet at least annually with the Treasury Secretary and the CDFI Director. Third, increase NACA appropriations to $50 million. Capital is needed to provide long-term low-interest funding for homeowners, Native American homeowners. And fourth, increase the annual funding of the HUD Section 4 to $50 million and establish a 10% set-aside for Native communities. Fifth, pass the Rural Housing Reform Act. And finally, pass the Native American Direct Loan Home Act. And I want to conclude by thanking the Congress and the subcommittee and encouraging you to maintain a relationship and a collaboration with Native CDFI leaders in developing funding of innovative policies that address the capital needs of Indian country.
Thank you very much. And last, we will hear from Ms. Tammy Moreland, who's joining us virtually.
Anin buju, Ningani and Nimkibanasi Ekwe Indigenous, Magizin and Dudum, Odawa Anishinaabe Ekwe Nindawa, Wekwe Wiwang Nindonjaba. My government name is Tammy Moreland. I have a small correction. I'm a tribal member of the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. I work for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe in central Minnesota, and I work for the Anji Bamadizing program. I have the honor and the responsibility of chairing the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative to Prevent and End Homelessness, which is a tribally initiated and innovative approach to address housing and homelessness for American Indians in Minnesota. I'm honored to appear before you today to talk about the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative's work to ending homelessness through state and federal change. Thank you, Senator Smith, for calling this hearing and inviting me to testify on behalf of the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative. The Minnesota Tribal Collaborative was funded in 2014 when a group of tribal housing and human services staff in northern and central Minnesota began to meet together with other supporting organizations to learn from each other about new resources and ideas for promising practices that help meet the unique needs of American Indians experiencing homelessness. In addition to the direct services that it provides, the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative has a strong advocacy for reforming state and federal law. We have been successful lobbying for changes to state and federal law because of our firsthand experience with homelessness and its root causes, and because we never give up. The reform to the federal law that the collaborative has accomplished with the Senator Tina Smith and other allies on Capitol Hill means that not only Minnesota tribes will have access to increased federal funding support, but hundreds of tribes throughout the United States will also be able to access those increased resources for our shared mission to reduce homelessness in Indian communities. In Minnesota, American Indians are more than 12 times more likely to experience homelessness and to be homeless longer than the white population. The most recent reservation homeless study conducted in 2018 found that half of the people homeless on reservations were children, youth, and elders. Most people met the definition of a chronic or long-term homeless, and nearly half of the people surveyed had a chronic health condition that impacted their ability to work or find housing. Our collaborative is successful because the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative are fearless. We usually take the hard way and not the easy way to accomplish our goals. And our goals aren't just for us, but we look forward several generations. The Minnesota Tribal Collaborative wants future generations to know that we came together with leaders to write new rules for society about how to thrive together. We experienced immense challenges, but in the end, we succeeded. We want future generations to know that this was a powerful generation that rose from adversities, and we gave them legacies and resources to take inspiration from. We want them to look at us with courage as we went through a difficult period of triumph and struggle. We hope they will talk about us as examples to emulate, as something to be, and to go onward to the future with. We want to end homelessness in our communities. The members of the Minnesota Tribal Collaborative always show up. We challenge the status quo, and we hold ourselves and others accountable for change. We have made changes, significant changes, and we intend to make more. We believe that nothing about us should happen without us, and we push to be part of meetings, fundings, trainings, and we always insist that our voices are heard. For the tribes to be successful in ending homelessness, both on and off the reservation, we ask the following from Congress. I have 5 points, but due to time, I'm only going to mention one. We ask that you support tribal efforts to end homelessness among tribal members as they move between the reservation and urban communities. Federal policies have pushed American Indians into and out of reservation communities for decades. This disruption in community life is one of the root causes of homelessness. Today, the federal government should support tribes' effort to meet the needs of tribal members where they are today. This is a federal government problem that can be solved by tribes and the federal government working together. Miigwech, thank you for your time. And by partnering together and sharing resources, we can end homelessness for America's first people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our witnesses for your testimony today. We will now move to a 5-minute round of questions from members of the committee, and I defer to Senator Tester from Montana to begin.
Well, I want to thank the chair, and I also want to thank all the folks who testified here today. I appreciate it very much. It's always been very, very difficult to get NAHASDA passed, and it's something that's very, very important, and we need to get it funded at a level that will work. I have agree with you, Ms. Fish. People don't understand the housing challenges in Indian country. Many folks back here don't understand the trust responsibilities we have to Native Americans. They are special to Native Americans, and I do think that the housing goes hand in hand with those responsibilities. I've also said that if we really want to address any issue, I don't care if it's schools, law enforcement, housing, the list is quite long, especially for those large land-based tribes, then we need to figure out ways to empower tribes to do that and support them in their efforts. One of the ways it was supposed to do that is through the HUD's Training and Technical Assistance Program, ensuring that tribes are knowledgeable and able to make housing decisions for their communities. It's not easy work. I have heard from tribes in Montana who have had difficulty in accessing the technical assistance system as it is currently implemented by the Housing and Urban Development. So this question is for you, Ms. Fish, and you can add in Mr. Goggles, Ms. Upton, Ms. Moreland, if you'd like. But NAIHC runs a technical assistant training program for tribal housing entities. From your perspective, what needs to be done to improve training and technical assistance to tribes that are utilizing those HUD dollars to really make a difference getting housing in Indian country?
One of the ways, thank you, Senator Tester. One of the ways that we have explored developing an efficacious technical assistance delivery system is to return to the way that our technical assistance funding was passed down to the National American Indian Housing Council. We currently work off of a cooperative agreement. The process is for receiving technical assistance assignments. Invoicing for that technical assistance is very burdensome. The administrative process alone, working through this mechanism, I have 2 staff members that predominantly do this work, working in the DRGR, working with the different operational systems that HUD has in place, working with their Office of Procurement, OPM is very difficult. Getting contracts passed that support the technical assistance delivery is very difficult, working through that mechanism. And so we've explored the option to return to the old way, which was where we received a grant. And we were able to receive the technical assistance requests directly and then deliver the technical assistance. In the same stroke or in the same step, we're also able to develop best practices, case studies, and do our own research in a very streamlined way. There you go.
Good. Anybody else like comment? Mr. Goggles?
Senator Tester, thank you. TNTA at the National American Indian Housing level works. I can attest to that. I have 13 years of unmodified opinions on my financial compliance audits.
Okay.
So we are good stewards of the federal assistance and Uncle Sam's dollar. It impacts how we deliver services to our clientele. So I know the TNTA works. When we had it before at NEHC, we had folks coming to our reservation without too much of a bureaucratic system in place. Now it's more having a couple of folks that you have to jump through some hoops for. But getting that service to us, getting out to the grantees helps them understand like federal regulation, like 2 CFR, understanding Native American Housing and Self-Determination Act, understanding the eligible activities that you can participate in, and the kinds of activities under the Indian Community Development Block Grant Program.
Okay, really quickly, and it's for you, Mr. Upton. You listed a half a dozen things that we could do in Congress. Could you give me your number one issue of those 6?
Of the 6 would be to increase appropriations for the NACA program. It was stagnant from 2014 to roughly 2020 at 16 million. There's 72 native CDFIs, and it's up to approximately 23 million now. 50 million is what we need, and that would make a huge impact, especially if we're going to make native CDFIs 184 lenders. We need capital.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Senator Lummis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Goggles, you mentioned it took 6 years to work through and jump through all the hoops necessary to get your now September 2023 project to this point. Could you describe some of those hoops and how can we help cut that down, the amount of time?
Vice Chair Lummis, one of the areas has been the working relationship with the Bureau of Indian Affairs Realty Department. It took me approximately 2 years to master lease the subdivision meets and bounds of the survey that we did, plus 2 years of delay from the pandemic. So it took me about 4 years to obtain the leasing authority through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Currently, they are understaffed. There's only 2 people in the realty division at the Wind River Agency. So that's one of the challenges is getting the land. The other challenge is when we develop a project, infrastructure is always a 1/3 of our development costs. So at the Cheap Laco project, 9.1 million total, 2 million is for infrastructure. And putting that infrastructure according to federal regulation, according to ONAP, HUD regulations under the Indian Housing Block Grant, under the Indian Community Development Block Grant, and the use of community facilities from USDA, each one has its own set of regulations.
Yeah, that's so embarrassing.
So navigating these regulatory requirements requires experience, it requires training, like we were talking about, TNTA. Everybody's shop does their own thing. The third is environmental reviews.
Are those
you're going to-
houses on well and septic or?
We're developing this project with domestic water, domestic wastewater, and drainage. Individual home sites use the septic system and cisterns when they're developing a unit out in the country, and there's 2.5 acres generally. What I've leased for the subdivision is about 20 acres for 20 homes. The cost is part of that. For the 10 units that I'm building that are 3-bedroom, $252,000 apiece. For the 10 4-bedrooms, $267,000 apiece. These are manufactured housing units.
Geez.
Yep.
And then it was earlier mentioned numbers like 600,000. I can't remember who said that. Was that?
That's in Alaska.
Oh, in Alaska.
In Alaska, just talking to my colleagues in that area, there are 2 seasons up there. That's the season that you play basketball, and the other is for getting your materials up there in a timely manner so you can construct a house.
Yeah.
So 2 very different methods of building, with the northern plains, Great Plains of our area versus Alaska. They're very, very different. In the Southwest, you'd find very different approaches as well.
Can you see ways that we could fold the programs you mentioned into one and streamline it?
Under the Indian Community Development Block Grant Program, we could make that program more flexible, that it could fund infrastructure. One of the areas that I'm working on is redevelopment of streets. They haven't been repaired or rebuilt since the time they were first put in by HUD. And now that I've taken over, I'm having difficulties just repairing streets. This last winter, we were using our monies to provide snow removal services because of a extremely harsh winter.
Extremely.
Extremely harsh winter. So under the Indian Community Development Block Grant, making that program more flexible. Under the Indian Housing Block Grant as well, we can use these funds to develop infrastructure and fund development at the same time.
What if you find a house that it needs plumbing and electrical upgrades and heating upgrades? Are there programs that are easily accessible to take care of those needs?
Senator Lamas, under our Indian Housing Block Grant, we repair and rehab and modernize housing. Some of the housing stock I have now is about 40 years old. So when you get into that house, you're going to repair electrical.
Yeah.
Because back 40 years ago, we didn't have the electrical devices we have now. And the houses need 2 bathrooms, not just one. Yeah. So you're looking at the modernization of houses so they have at least 2 bathrooms. In the case of the pandemic, you could quarantine a family in that type of house with 2 bathrooms.
Yeah, good point.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Goggles. Appreciate it.
Senator Lummis, if you have additional questions you'd like to ask so you don't break up your flow,
Okay,
please
great.
go right ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Fish, what reforms do you think are necessary to improve NAHIC?
I just want to clarify, the National American Indian Housing Council?
No, I
NAHIC?
guess I have the wrong acronym. What is it? NAHASDA?
NAHASDA?
I'm sorry, I get the acronyms mixed up.
We simply need to get this legislation passed. That is the first grand step, is simply passing the legislation.
Okay. Mr. Upton, how are Native community development financial institutions providing support to prospective Native homeowners?
First of all, I think they're being innovative with the products that they design, and also they're really focusing efforts in collaborative ways, statewide, regionally, by developing collaborations of Native CDFIs. They provide support when it comes to Native home ownership. That's where Native CDFIs come into play.
And but do they work on tribal trust lands, or can it only work on fee land?
No, the most successful, I was just up in South Dakota last week, and this was interesting, of the 86 related homes loans that were closed last year, totaled $7 million in South Dakota. CDFIs made up 85% of the lending, and those were acquisitions, 39 homes, 9 homes were newly constructed, and 7 were interim construction, and then 24 rehabs. But Native CDFIs made up the lending portion of that. 85% of it came from Native CDFIs.
Thank you. And then a quick question for Ms. Moreland. Do you find there is data available to accurately determine housing needs on and off the reservation?
I believe that there is a start, at least in Minnesota, for collecting the data. Minnesota has worked with the Wilder Research, and they do a reservation-specific survey. And this is the year that we're doing it. We're going to be doing it towards the end of this year, and we will be able to collect that data. We've been working with Wilder since about 2006, and so we do have some data that is available. One of the innovative things with the data that we collect with Wilder is Wilder has respected tribal sovereignty, and The data that is collected is owned by each tribe, and the tribe will decide how they would like to disperse that information and use that information. So it's not data that's being collected by non-natives used in a non-native way. The tribes own their data.
Okay, thank you. And this question is for anyone who wishes to weigh in. Are there special programs for Native American veterans to obtain housing, and who administers those, and how are they working? Ms.
Thank you
Fish.
for the question, Senator Lummis. Yes, there are programs that allow access to housing for Native American veterans. One bill that is out there right now that was introduced by Congressman Tom Cole is the Tribal HUD VASH, which is a result of a demonstration program allowing vouchers to be used for the subsidization of housing for veterans, and it has worked very well. And we're looking at in the future being able to transition those into home ownership as well. Another program that allows for veterans for home ownership and purchase is run out of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Veterans Affairs, okay.
Could I comment on that one?
Yes, please, and then
Okay.
I'll yield back.
Okay.
Thank you.
The other bill that I think that really needs the support is the Native American Direct Loan Improvement Act, which there would be, it's the Senate Bill 185 as part of the 5 veteran bills that went to the floor on April 26th of 23 and unfortunately failed. But it would create $5 million of relending program that would allow Native CDFIs who intimately understand Native communities and the mortgage lending process on tribal trust properties to obtain a loan through the Native American Direct Loan Program at 1% interest, and allow veterans to use the program to refinance non-VA mortgages so that Native veterans have the same opportunity as non-Native veterans to use their VA benefits to refinance existing mortgage loans. So that one would be extremely important to pass.
Thank you, witnesses.
Thank you very much. We are now going to turn to Senator Cortez Masto from Nevada, who is asking her questions remotely.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the ranking member as well. It's been a great discussion, and I couldn't agree more with my colleagues in the need to pass NAHASDA and so many other essential housing bills that we can to support tribal housing. Let me ask a question that hasn't been asked yet. Around manufactured homes, because I know there's a lot of support in Nevada and really across the country. What I see, a third of new homes on tribal lands are manufactured homes. And Ms. Fish, maybe let me ask you this question. One, why is there that popularity of tribal homes? Are there financing issues associated with these tribal homes? And are there programs, including CDFI funds, that help home buyers finance, a manufactured home? So maybe Ms. Fish, let me start with you.
I want to respond and give you an example of the Rosebud Sioux tribe with the manufacturing of homes. So in the 60s, there was a tribal housing program that created transitional housing for the Rosebud Sioux tribal citizens. They were living in downtrodden circumstances and living in shacks and tents, and so they were transitioned into this temporary housing. Then in the late 60s, you had something called Sioux for 100, which built 400 two-bedroom houses that now have 3 to 4 families living in them. In the 70s and 80s, there were approximately 1,200 or 1,160 homes created. And that's the stock of housing that the Rosebud Sioux tribe now uses in their formulated Indian Housing Block Grant. They have since purchased to your point, manufacturing a housing plant. They purchased that 12 years ago and now plan to use ARPA funds to supplement the manufacturing of 100 new homes in the next 2 years. In addition to that, they used ARPA funds to furnish kitchens and develop innovative kitchen designs that folks would be able to have shared spaces that would accommodate eating at a table, so on and so forth. I do not know the details around the CDFI network and their support of manufactured homes, but I do know that they are.
So these are new, right? Single family construction of homes, is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I would be curious to because I know this is an option that should be considered, but I also understand, and I'm grateful that the ARPA funds and other appropriations that we have identified have helped. But I am curious how the financing comes together, if CDFI can be a part of it. And then let me just put on your radar. There's a new HUD program called Preservation and Reinvestment Initiative for Community Enhancement Grant Program. It's called PRICE. It was included in the appropriations bill, and it provided $225 million in grants to assist manufactured home communities already existing, not to repair their sewer and water, to fix their roads, to support flood mitigation. I'm curious if the tribes have taken advantage of those funds or even aware of those funds that are eligible, and they're only there for a short period of time. So those are two questions. Let me throw those out there. And maybe Mr. Upton, CDFI, is there an option for that financing to come to help manufactured homes?
Again, the challenge with native CDFIs is it's underfunded for the last 10 to 15 years, especially for the appropriations under the NACA program. Currently, again, it's about 23 to 24 million, and we've asked the appropriations to increase to 50 million. And by being able to leverage private dollars with that, that would make a significant impact. And manufactured housing is not, it's a product that native CDFIs would finance, but 9 times out of 10, before I came on this trip, I reached out to probably 20 to 30 native CDFIs, and the number one challenge was the lack of capital. We don't have the capital. And I know in the HUD, the Section 184, it was, they're wanting to make CDFIs lenders. Well, we can't be lenders without the appropriate capital. You're inviting us to a game that we can't play.
So, and have the federal home loan bank system in your area, are they providing advances or support for housing, particularly in tribal community? I'm curious.
In our particular area, we're multi-state, so I'm not an expert on what they provide, but I do know that it's very limited when it comes to native CDFIs.
Yeah, and that's the problem. And listen, we see, and I know my time is running out, and I appreciate it, Madam Chairwoman, but we've seen the benefits through the CARES Act, through American Rescue Plan, through ARPA, where we actually carve out, we focus on set-asides for our tribal communities, and I think it is so important we continue to do so. But we also talk to those other funding opportunities, whether it's the home loan banks, federal home loan banks, that their mission is to be in our communities, looking at affordable housing and housing in general, that they also are focusing on our tribal communities. And then the only other final question I have is, to the extent that you're not aware of that new HUD program, the PRICE program, that helps existing manufactured homes, I'd hope you take advantage of those opportunities as well. So thank you. I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. We have Senator Sinema, who is also joining us remotely. Senator Sinema.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. 22 federally recognized tribes call Arizona home, and I'm proud to work with them closely to be a voice and advocate for Indian country. It's important to me that tribes receive the respect, recognition, and resources owed to them by the federal government. We have a housing shortage throughout Arizona, but the issues that face tribal communities in Arizona are unique, complex, and deserve additional attention and focus. So, Ms. Fish, thank you for being here. I've heard from Native housing authorities in Arizona about the growing problem of fentanyl and methamphetamine use in their communities, which is a trend we're also seeing in non-Native communities. My understanding is that the cost of remediating housing units where drug use has occurred is quite expensive, particularly for smaller tribes. Is this a problem in other parts of the country? And more generally, what can you share with the subcommittee today on this topic?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The short answer is yes. This is a very common problem in Indian country or in tribal communities. And in fact, we spend most of our Indian housing block grant funds in remediating maintaining and rehabbing homes than we do in any type of development or new construction of homes. Yes.
Well, thank you. I've also heard that this is a growing problem and that tribes are using their Indian housing block grant allocations to pay for remediation costs. One tribe in Arizona told me that they're spending around $1 million per year on remediation activities associated with meth and fentanyl. Now, this worries me for many reasons, but especially because it means that these dollars aren't used towards expanding affordable housing. So, Ms. Fish, is this scenario I just described in Arizona an outlier, or is this happening all over?
This is happening all over.
Thank you. I'm working to provide some more attention and funding on this issue to help tribal housing authorities address remediation issues and expand access to affordable housing in Indian country. Switching gears now, I want to touch on the Hearth Act and Indian homeownership briefly. As you all know, the Hearth Act allows for leasing of tribal trust lands in accordance with tribal law without requiring the Interior Department to approve each transaction. I'd like to hear briefly from each of our witnesses today on why more tribes haven't utilized this law. And are there barriers that we should be aware of that we can assist with? I'm also going to submit this question for the record so that each of you have more opportunity to provide expansive responses. So if you would, in the time that we have together, be somewhat brief.
Senator, this is Patrick Goggles, state of Wyoming. John Barrasso sponsored that legislation, consulted myself on the use of it. On the Wind River Indian Reservation, we have two tribes, the Northern Arapaho and the Eastern Shoshone. And getting the two tribes to agree on a set of regulations that govern each tribe commonly has been difficult to come by. The Hearth Act allows tribes or tribe in some cases where there's a single tribe on the reservation to promulgate regulations under the Hearth Act for leasing. They still have to have the Bureau of Indian Affairs' approval to implement those Hearth regulations in terms of leasing of individual home sites or subdivisions in their area, which includes rights-of-ways, easements, road easements, and utility rights-of-ways. In my case, I use a utility license agreement with the Northern Arapaho tribe in place of the Hearth Act right now to get that job done and streamline that process.
Senator, I would agree that there are different, I always refer to what we do on a daily basis as a big jigsaw puzzle. Each community has, their own set of pieces, and just like you mentioned there, not utilizing the Hearth program and utilizing another program that fits. That's really what we do on a daily basis, is we look for what fits for our community and what is going to be streamlined and probably the quickest and the fastest, and that what we're most comfortable with. In Native CDFIs, whether it comes to funding, not every Native CDFI probably can use the 502, but they might be able to use other programs. So we're constantly looking for different pieces to make it work in our communities. Each community is a little bit different. Last week I spent a week up in South Dakota with the South Dakota Native Home Ownership Coalition. There were about 8 Native CDFIs in the room, and they introduced the new Freddie Mac program, and only maybe 2 of them said it could work for them. But I said, but that's a positive thing because that piece that fits your puzzle.
Thank you for the question. The short answer is that it's difficult and very challenging for tribes to, so the tribes work with the BIA's realty office to be able to exercise the Hearth Act and that realty office is challenged with getting tribes ready to take over leasing. And they need the local capacity to take over. So really it is a capacity issue within tribes themselves and also within the BIA. So that component of the process is so overwhelming that tribes are discouraged from being able to exercise it.
Thank you, Senator Sinema.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. So let's see, I have a couple of questions I'd like to follow up on. Mr. Upton, let me start with you. You, in your testimony, you referred to these proposed rule changes at the Department of Treasury. You and I have spoken about this before, I think, when I came to visit the Native CDFI Coalition. Could you just identify what, with a little bit more specificity, what you see as some of the challenges, or let me put it this way, how those proposed rules would negatively affect how Native CDFIs operate?
The probably the top of mind for me would be when it comes to the prohibiting balloon payments, doing an amortization for maybe 30 years and ballooning it after 10 to 15 years. I mean, that's a daily practice in the banking industry. And then also prohibiting interest-only loans. We deal with so many contractors, and that's how they operate. And we don't let our loans go evergreen, like on our interest-only loans. They're very skilled contractors that we use. They do a job, they draw down on their line of credit, and when the job's over, they pay it off and they roll on to the next job. And that would really prohibit a lot of Native CDFIs by being creative and finding new products to get Native homeowners. And one point, I just want to draw, we had a loan back in 2013 that we did. When we did a balloon payment, 30 years, 15-year balloon on it, and bought it for $90,000. And she wouldn't have been able to get into that loan. She couldn't have afforded a 15-year mortgage, but we were able to go 30. And just recently bought it for 90, sold it for about 200. Mm-hmm. So that was a significant increase.
Yeah. You use the analogy of a puzzle and how it's constantly trying to figure out how to put these puzzles together. And I think one of the things we've learned is that Native CDFIs are particularly skilled at understanding how to put those pieces of the puzzle together for Native people on tribal land. And so I think I'll continue to lift up these concerns with the Treasury rules. I think that they're important to keep in mind. Ms. Moorhead, you in your testimony identified 5, I think, or so important issues for us to consider, and you focused on one of them. I want to focus in on another of them, which has to do with the issue of kind of how continuum of care works for how it works. You came to my office, I think we had a discussion about this a couple of years ago, and we talked about how tribes weren't eligible to receive funding to respond to homelessness under the Continuum of Care program. And so we worked together with Senator Murkowski to pass the Tribal Access to Homeless Assistance Act. It's a mouthful, but it essentially allowed tribes to become able to participate in this. But I think you and I both know there's been some issues with implementation here. Could you just talk a bit about why it was important to make this change to allow tribes to participate in continuum of care and what we need to do so that this is actually working well for tribes?
Thank you for the question. One of the issues that we are finding that is a struggle to implement is the pro rata, how they decide how much funding you get. Tribes typically are checkerboard, at least they are here in Minnesota, right, which means that their land is not touching each other. And so the formula kind of gets messed up, and we would not receive very much funding, enough funding to actually have a project. And so we can apply through our continuum of care, but that's not something that we want to do. We want to be able to receive that funding directly. With the formula, we would like for the formula to be distributed kind of like they are in the territories. Rarely when federal dollars go to like state agencies or it rarely trickles down to Indian communities when it comes through the state government. And so by providing the tribes greater access to the money by receiving it directly, that will help projects that can be meaningful and it can help address the root cause to homelessness.
Thank you. That's
And I have one other quick
please.
thing. It goes to the thing about the HUD's definition of homelessness. In Minnesota, we have really cold winters, and families, like the other partners have said, have a lot of overcrowding in our houses. And then by having the overcrowding, then that makes the houses to become substandard. And let me gather my thoughts here. And so if the definition was changed, it would allow access to help the individuals. When a person is homeless and then they go for the winter and they stay with a relative just for a short period of time, then they become unhomeless because they're housed, even though technically they're really still homeless. They're just staying somewhere so they can stay alive. And so it would be something to consider changing that definition of what homelessness is for HUD. Some of the times here in Minnesota, I don't know if people are familiar about fish shacks or fish houses. It's a tiny little house and it sits on the lake. Usually there's like a propane heater or maybe a wood stove and like a bed and a hole in the floor so that you can fish. And quite frequently, we have people who are living in these very small fish houses because they don't have anywhere else to go. And if they're living in a fish house, then that makes them housed. And so then they don't fit in the definition of being homeless.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think Senator Lummis and I are both familiar with fish houses. Yes. So I am I'm past my time, but I'm going to ask one last question. Then, unless Senator Lummis has other questions, I'll be ready to close this up. But I want to just ask a question of Mr. Goggles. Everybody, all of our members of the panel have talked about how important it is to reauthorize NAHASDA, which I certainly agree with. I was wondering, Mr. Goggles, if you could give us just one or two very specific examples about how a reauthorized NAHASDA would help you when it's not reauthorized, how that hinders you in your work.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. First of all, in the past, we have lived off a continuing resolution.
Right.
Under a continuing resolution, you're authorized or you're allocated funds that are only good for that year. So you don't know what you're going to get the following fiscal year.
Right.
So
So you can't plan.
in terms of planning, yes,
Yeah.
just like any other municipality in the country, if you have a known stream of revenue coming your way, you can plan for those projects. But you can also plan, to fund your employees as well. Them not knowing if they're going to get a raise or not, and me not being able to give it, makes me the bad guy. So that would be one instance of the reauthorization of NAHASDA. The other is that what we're asking for in the reauthorization is Section 8, the Housing Choice Voucher. Under the Housing Choice Voucher, most of America receives home assistance through the Housing Choice Voucher. We in the country are not able to use Section 8 because of the acute shortage on our reservation. We would be able to use Section 8 in the local municipalities to help ease the overcrowding or the acute lack of housing in our area. That would be very helpful to us. Those are two short examples, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank all of our witnesses today for being here and for providing excellent testimony. Before we adjourn, I'd like to enter into the record a report on Native homelessness in Minnesota and a report on homelessness mortality. Is there any objection to that? Hearing none, that is so ordered. For senators who wish to submit questions for the record, those questions are due 1 week from today, which will be Tuesday, June 20th. For our witnesses, you will have 45 days to respond to any questions for the record. Thank you again for taking the time to participate in this hearing today. Thank you to Senator Lummis. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.